Hi everyone. Welcome to something that is going to be a little different from me. This channel and these stories will be detailing some of the lore and adventures of my custom Space Marine chapter for Warhammer 40k, the Star Hunters. These will mostly be audio sagas, but for those of you that do like to watch something, there will be pictures I've taken of the Star Hunters units that I've painted thus far. From these images, you'll probably be able to tell that I'm as much a mini painter as I am a photographer or voice actor. Nevertheless, let us both, you and I, dive into the sagas of the Star Hunters. Prologue. The Sins of the Father. Andar, called Bearheart by his kin, gazed out into the void. It was a sight he had grown accustomed to. The Indomitus Crusade had travelled through enough space, and Andar far preferred its indifference to the clamouring hunger of the warp. There was a cold comfort out there, knowing that across all of those stars, millennia away, was a small blue planet on which sat the most powerful human there had ever been. Andar allowed his lips to turn slightly at the thought of the Emperor, interred on the golden throne, as though he could feel him returning his gaze. His smile vanished, and his brow furrowed, as he remembered what else had been out there. Mutants, heretics, aliens. Worse. He had encountered many of them already. Quite apart from the battles he had fought during the Crusade, the purging of the ship that had now become his chapter's home had wrought an iron support onto the hatred he already bore for the enemies of humanity. They had found the Hunter's Moon almost 2 Terran weeks ago now. It was an ancient space hulk, of a kind that had not been built in the Imperium for thousands of years. Though it had once belonged to the Space Wolves, mostly all traces of that noble origin had long been stripped away. Centuries of neglect, warp storms, and eventual evasion by outside forces had turned the vessel into a twisted remembrance of greatness. Eventually, it had been spat back out into real space, on the side of the galaxy now known as Imperium Nihilus. What had caused his sires to abandon the hulk, Andar could not say. He, perhaps, did not want to know. There were no records left on board the ship, and none in the Crusade had ever even heard of it. Yet the grey panelling and proud bronze and gold wolf's head on the prow put its lineage beyond any doubt, and thus it had to be retaken. Retaking it had proved easier in word than in deed. Quite what his chapter had expected to find had never been realised. Indeed, they had encountered a 3-way war taking place throughout the Hunter's Moon. In the hab levels and engine rooms, in the armories and ship docks, battle was joined between the Tyranids, the Drukhari, and the foul forces of chaos. How any of them had got there, Andar could not say, for it was his job to make sure that they left, and there was only one way out for creatures such as these. It had cost lives. Of the 1,000 men they had brought aboard the Hunter's Moon, 732 were left. Chapter Master Troche, leader of the Star Hunters, had been their most grievous loss. In an effort to purge the last of the Drukhari from the ship, he had been trapped behind their lines by an enormous force of Tyranids that had come to join in the slaughter. He fell, buying time for the rest of his brothers to escape back to the levels that they had cleared. By some blessing of Russ, he had not died, and Andar had breathed a sigh of joy when they brought his body home after cleansing those levels once and for all. The Medicae team worked around the clock to keep him alive, though it was a battle that they were slowly losing. In normal circumstances, they would have interred him in a holy dreadnought, waking him only sparingly to mete out the All-Father's wrath when he was most needed. But they did not have one. The 3 Redemptor-pattern dreadnoughts they already had were occupied and engaged. Andar stirred. He could feel a presence near him. He spun round, his Absolver bolt pistol sheath already in his hand. He found it pointing at a snarling purple wolf face, 2 glowing blue eyes leering at him from out of the shadows. Erlen, he said, lowering the pistol. The sergeant removed his helmet, laughing. It was a sound so rarely heard throughout these metal streets, yet it seemed very little could dampen the spirits of the sergeant of the 2nd Company Hounds of Morkai. Greetings, Bearheart, he replied, his elongated canines showing just past his lips as he grinned at the wolf priest. How goes the fighting? Andar had already had all of the reports, but he liked to hear directly from the men who had been there also. Well enough. The Drukhari are definitely gone from this place. My packs have been searching the levels they used to inhabit from top to bottom. There's not a creature under the stars that could have escaped them. My packs. Erlen Nightfoot was a sergeant of 1 pack of hounds, yet it was he that many others turned to as well for advice. They were the packs of the company Jarls, yet Erlen commanded their respect just as fiercely. He could be a Jarl himself one day, if he could always remember to not let his hot blood temper his decision-making. The traitors and their demon whelps are broken as well. They have no permanent footing anymore. Their last encampment in the archives has been overrun and put to the torch. Good tidings indeed. Did any of the archives survive? Erlen shook his head, his shaggy black hair tied in a thick braid swaying as he did so. None. Many of those archives were too old anyway, and those that had survived were surely tainted by the forces around them. Better to let Halvar and his squad's flamestorm gauntlets have their moment. Better to purge it all, Andar agreed. Would that we could with those thrice damned bugs. They're dug in deeper than the Imperial Palace on the engine levels. Still? Still, Erlen nodded. What joy he had gained in reporting the destruction of 2 of their foes had become soured by the report on the 3rd. They've turned them into some kind of biomass-producing swamp. It's nigh impossible to get anywhere near them, there are so many of them down there. We cannot hope to win by force of number, not against the Tyranids. We shall have to pick a battleground where their numbers will count for less against our blades. Erlen growled his agreement. I believe Herrick Ironeye of the 4th has some thoughts on that. How fares Herrick? He has not been Jarl of the 4th long. He fares well. He speaks little, but what he does say is born of wisdom, a quality I can respect in a leader. It's something many of our leaders seem to have. Erlen fixed Andar with a gaze something like daring, mixed with mirth. Andar saw the gaze, but did not rise to it. He knew Erlen wanted him to lead the chapter, as Trucker had done. And what of you, Bearheart? Continued Erlen, leaving the moment behind them like tracks in the snow. Strange to see you without the bear's face on. He was referring to the helmet that Andar often wore, carved in the likeness of a great bear, though made to look like the skull helms that were a badge of his office. He gestured to it now, lying on the table next to his wolf-headed Crozius Arcanum Gauntbreaker. I had thought I was alone. I do not wear it when not in front of the men. It was far from the customs of the space wolves that were his predecessors to change the helmet of a wolf priest as he had done, but it was a decision that Andar had thought necessary. As star hunters, it was their job to embody all predators, not just the wolf. More fool you then. Had I been one of the enemy, you would have been dead before I got as close as I did. It is only because I knew you were the enemy that I allowed you to get that close. Erlen laughed, and Andar felt his face soften. They had fought together for many years, and Andar still felt Erlen's permanent good mood infect him when they were together. A sound broke the mirth between them. My lord, I need you on Hab Zone 311. Absolute urgency. It was the voice of Earnhard Groundquaker, Eradicator Sergeant in the 2nd Company. Andar switched to a private vox feed between them, reaching for his helmet and hammer. What is it, Sergeant? It's Boren, priest. Something's happened to him. Is he injured? No, sir. Ranner is, but he'll live. You speak in vagaries, Sergeant. Andar allowed the irritation to seep into his voice, even as he and Erlen were running to the grav lifts. He knew that the other Marine would be signalling to his pack to meet them at the same position. Apologies, priest. I'm not sure what happened to Boren. We've had to lock him in one of the Hab quarters. You'd better come quick. I'm on my way, Sergeant. Let no one in until I am there. Acknowledged. Erlen and Andar thundered down the corridors built by their sires, even as they could hear the heavy thuds from other levels indicating that their brothers were doing the same. They reached the hab levels after Erlen's hounds, who were gathered outside of the hab rooms, their dark grey and purple armour looking out of place in the bright lights that illuminated them. They were so used to moving through the shadows and inflicting terror from beyond the scene that Andar wondered how long it had been since any of them had removed their lupine helmets. They parted silently to let Andar and Erlen through and down the corridor that led to Earnhard's position. The man, already huge before he had been ensconced in his Gravis armour, was stood outside one of the doors to a hab room, his helmet affixed and his melter rifle in his hands. I am here, Sergeant, said Andar. Where is Rana Skychaser? In here, called a voice from the next room. Andar entered to see Rana, called Skychaser by his brothers, lying on one of the bunks. He was still in his armour, but his face was what drew Andar's attention. The Marine had 4 huge marks across his face, deep gouges that ran from his forehead to his cheek. His left eye had been ravaged so utterly that Andar was unsure if it could be saved, and his lower lip was a red ruin. The bleeding had long since stopped, but the wounds were still red and angry. Andar took some healing salves and pressed them onto Rana's face. It would have stung in a way that no other pain would, but Rana's armour had already injected him with enough pain reductors to keep him numb to such things. We need to get you to the med bay, brother. Servitors are on their way, replied Kjeld, called Hellroarer by his brothers, who was at his brother's side. Good. The apothecaries and med servitors there will be able to help you better than I can here, and tell Priest Olin to meet you there. Olin was known in the chapter as one of their best healers. Did Boren do this? Rana grimaced, and Andar saw some of the stringy matter in his face that had been exposed by the wounds tighten. Aye, he's not as he was. What do you mean? We were clearing some demons out from nearby. There were 3 of them, trapped in a room 3 down from where we are now. Throne only knows how they managed to sneak in there, but in there they were. It was a simple enough purging, save for the last one. All of a sudden, Boren drops his melta and starts pulling off his armour. At first I thought he had been hit with something and had succumbed to the weird. As the Groundquaker cornered the last demon, I tried to help Boren. That's when he attacked me. I didn't get a particularly good look at him, but he was swinging wildly at me, snarling like a beast. He was strong, stronger than anything I'd encountered before. And his eyes were different. Different how? They were the eyes of a monster lord. Did you happen to ask if he had any spare? Asked Erlen from behind Andar, safe in his humour now that it looked like Rana would be spared his end. Andar glowered him into silence, before suggesting Rana continue. I didn't get a chance, much as you didn't get a chance to become a Scaldo, Nightfoot, Rana replied. He threw me off him and bounded towards the last demon, picked it up by 1 foot and 1 arm, and tore the thing limb from limb. He made it look like pulling a leg off a roast. He knocked the sergeant over as he was leaving, and swiped at me as I tried to block his exit. That's what... Rana gestured to his face, letting the wounds finish his sentence better than his words could. He did this with his hands? No, Lord. They were not hands. They were claws. Do you sense anything? Asked Andar of Erlen. As a hound of Morkai, Erlen was more perceptive than most to psychic abominations and the terrors of the weird. His brother shook his head. This close, I'd be able to feel any warp trickery on my teeth. Whatever has happened to Boren, it has nothing to do with that. It can't be, whispered Andar. What do you mean? Asked all of his brothers in unison, but before he could answer, the servitors entered and attempted to place Rana on the stretcher they carried between them. Leave me, blast you, he snarled at them, sitting up on the bunk. I'll make my own way to the med bay. Just make sure to pick up any bits of my face that might fall off on the way. Andar watched as Rana made his way past his brothers, cursing as he went. It was good that he would not have to administer the rites of Morkai to another brother aboard their own ship. He turned to Earnhardt. Boren is still in the room? As if by way of a reply, the door shook in its frame with an enormous bang. Earnhardt nodded in affirmation. Strange, though. You can't lock it from the outside. He's activated it himself from the inside. Did you get any better look at him than Rana did? No, Lord. I was more concerned with the demon at the time. Did they have anything to do with what's happened to him? I don't know, Andar admitted. I don't think so. But if I am right about what has happened to him, then we may be in danger of something far worse than demons. There was a loud scrape and a series of smashing sounds from inside the room. Andar was glad. He had said more than he meant to already, and did not want to answer any questions until he knew more, especially ones of the like Erlen tended to ask. I must go in and see for myself what has happened, he continued. I'll come with you, agreed Erlen. And I, said Earnhardt. I would like to know what has happened to my packmate. Very well. The rest of you, stand guard here. Let none come this way. Two of Erlen's hounds nodded and paced off silently down each end of the corridor. The rest took up what positions they could in the corridor, all looking towards the door that now had two sizable dents in it. Andar tried to listen past the entrance, willing his augmented hearing to pick up some sign of where Boren was in the room, but he could hear nothing. Without waiting longer, he gestured for Earnhardt to activate the lock override. A few seconds later, the door hissed open. The lights inside the room had been turned off. It was no matter for Andar, whose helmet immediately switched into low light mode. He could see the devastation that had been wrought upon the room. Tables and chairs had been smashed or hurled far from their original places. The bunks were likewise destroyed, the fabric of the beds torn and scattered. Across the walls, Andar could see deep scratch marks, matching the kind that had ravaged Rana's face. Andar became aware of a sound, a deep, slow noise, as though some large animal were breathing heavily from exertion. As they entered the room further, a new shape presented itself. As it unfurled from its crouched position, Andar could tell it was large, bigger even than Earnhardt. The sound stopped. It was replaced by a new sound. A snarl. Boren, stand down, brother, Andar shouted, but it was too late. The huge shape dashed towards the three Marines, faster than anything that size had any right being. As it shot past them, Andar caught a glimpse at the thing. It was a mess of matted dark fur, of the same coppery red-brown that Boren's hair had been. Andar saw two eyes, bright, yellow and wild, dashing madly in their sockets. A force like the swing of a fist from a dreadnought slammed into him, sending him crashing to the ground. He could hear Erlen and Earnhardt shouting, willing Boren to stop, even as their grasping hands met nothing but empty air. Boren barreled through all three of them, out of the now open door and down the corridor. A series of more crashes, scrapes and thuds met Andar's ears as Boren thundered through Erlen's hounds that had been stationed outside. Andar leapt to his feet and ran out into the corridor, but it was already too late. He saw one last glimpse of fur and purple and grey armour bounding round the corridors. In its wake were Erlen's hounds, all left sprawling on the floor or slumped against walls. Something told Andar they were fine. Some instinct shared between brothers, something intangible yet as real as his bolter, made Andar understand. Boren had been purposefully trying not to kill his brothers. Erlen ran down the corridor, helping his pack to their feet all the same. His vox bead is still active, said Earnhardt. We can follow him. Move, growled Erlen at his pack. We can trace without the need for screens. What mirth there had been in Erlen's voice not a minute before was dead. In its place was a revenant of tone, made of battle-ready seriousness, and excitement at the thrill of the hunt. Andar nodded. Go. The hounds were gone without another word. their grey and purple Phobos armour seeming to reach out to the shadows as they moved. Andar turned to Earnhard. He shrugged. They ran. They followed Boren's path of destruction through multiple levels. They found other star hunters, their kin, in much the same state as Erland's hounds had been. Andar's helmet display told him that they were all alive, and all were unharmed, though dazed. It was a pattern that was not lost on Andar. Boren had not harmed his brothers as he had fled from them. As they chased him, Andar realized that his worst fears had been confirmed. It was supposed to be impossible. They were Primaris, a new type of space marine, immune to impurity. This should not happen. Yet it had. There was no point in denying it now. No cursing the plotting of Belisarius Call would stop what was happening. What had already happened. They tore through corridors and rooms, down flights of stairs and over railings. The amount of their stunned kin that they had raced past grew fewer as they moved, until they stopped entirely. Andar had rarely been as deep into the hulk as they were going now. So few of his brothers had, that he believed it was not even mapped properly yet. They ran for hours, though it didn't feel like it. Andar's beast had awoken. The hunt was on. Even though it was one of his own brothers he was chasing, it had been so long since he had run, truly run, tracking his prey. The hand of Russ was on his shoulder, the voice of the Allfather urging him on. Andar sprinted through a gateway that had long since rusted open. The millennia-old mechanisms had lost their battle with time and neglect. He almost crashed headlong into one of Erland's hounds, who was standing guard in the corridor keeping watch. The hound stepped nimbly to the side, and Andar regained his composure. He didn't recognise the hound in question, but the Marine nodded to him and pointed over to where Erland stood. In front of him was an enormous rockcrete door. Much as the outside of the hulk had been unquestionable in its origin, this door was clearly the work of the Sons of Russ. Carved deep into its front was a large wolf's head, the mouth open and snarling, the tongue lolling out and built out of the wall, as though it were tasting the prey before it. Bronze runes shone faintly underneath, their glamour somehow untouched by the warp or the scavengers that plagued these halls. The rest of Nightfoot's pack was spread out in front of the door. Some were observing objects that were scattered around. "We thought it best to wait," hailed Erland as Andar caught up. As he did so, he saw what it was that had been tossed throughout the passage. It was the body of a gene stealer, one of the skittering multi-limbed abominations created by the Tyranid hive mind. It had been torn in two. Not cut as by a blade, but pulled apart entirely. Having fought these things before, Andar knew that the strength it must have taken to do such a thing was colossal. "And Boren?" asked Andar, still gazing at the parts of the gene stealer. "In there," Erland jabbed a thumb at the open door. "But Russ only knows how. A few of us had come this way, but try what we might, we couldn't open the damn thing." Andar moved to the door. Something about the tongue had not sat right with him, and now he knew why. "It's a gene code reader," he said quietly. "The Space Wolves must have deadbolt locked this door before they left, and only the blood of a wolf could open it again." "You think it accepted Boren's, even though he's not a Space Wolf of old?" "I think it recognised the beast," said Andar. He grasped one half of the open door and flung it wider for the bulkier frames of he and his brothers to fit through. Inside was a veritable treasure hoard. Weapons carved of ice-like diamonds and ancient suits of dark grey power armour littered the walls. In one corner, Andar could make out an enormous dark shape looming through the gloom. He removed his helmet and breathed in the smell. It was musky, ancient, the smell of a room that had been forgotten. But underneath all of that, there was the beast. The beating heart of Fenris. This room smelled of a world that Andar had never been to, and yet it still smelled of home. Two sounds caught his attention. Far off in the distance, A faint, rhythmical beeping. Much closer, something large breathed laboriously. It was this second sound he began to move towards, drawing Sif as he did so. Erlen and his pack fanned out on either side, making even less noise. Earnhardt had taken up position at the door and hadn't moved, covering their exit with his melter rifle. On the other side of a huge monument from which hung 3 suits of classical power armour, they found Boren. He was crouched in front of a pair of ornate frost claws, his own hands now claws clutching at his many fresh wounds. Had he been able to, Andar was certain he would have been terrified at the creature in front of him. Boren's power armour was almost entirely gone, scattered around him like the tyrannid body he had left outside. His eyes were crazed, bloodshot, the irises turned to a deep golden yellow. Across his body, tufts of fur sprouted, thick and orange like the single braid atop his head. As they approached, Boren snarled and backed away, showing elongated fangs. Andar had expected him to jump them. "Boren," he said, "we are not going to hurt you, brother." "We're not?" said Nightfoot quietly. "No," replied Andar sternly. "We have no reason to, because he isn't going to hurt us." Boren sniffed at the air. Andar knew what he was searching for. He lowered Sif and moved forward even slower than before, gesturing for the hounds to stay where they were. Boren snarled again, but did not move further back. "Good," said Andar softly. He held out his palm. Boren relaxed. All tension flowed out of his body, and he almost slumped to the ground. He knelt before Andar on one knee, gazing up at him with the eyes of a predator. "Brother," said Boren falteringly. His voice was changed as well, deeper and far harsher, his mouth still unused to having the larger teeth. "Brother," replied Andar. Boren nodded and got to his feet. Andar moved back quickly out of reflex, but Boren simply strode past him. He had been large when he was a Marine, but now with his beast truly unleashed, he was positively enormous. He marched over to where the ice claws rested on their plinth and picked them up. "Wait here, brother. We will return to the rest together." Boren nodded. "The rest of you, spread out and search this place. Nightfoot, find out what that is." Andar gestured to the beeping noise. As they spread out, Andar began to move over to the large, ominous shape he had seen before. His heart wanted to believe it, but he knew that it was unlikely. And yet, there it was. Standing before him, held aloft by cables, was the body of a huge dreadnought, a mighty axe still gripped in one hand. Andar dusted off the readout screens in front of him. It was working. Its systems may need some repairs and upgrades, but it worked. What was more, it was empty. They could do it. They could save Troche. "Bearheart," said Erlen over the vox. "Come and look at this." Andar made his way to where Erlen's message had come from, past weapons and scrolls, armors and trinkets. Everything in here would need inspecting, analysing, and redistributing. And they owed it all to Boren. Erlen was standing by a large metallic box. At first, Andar thought its surface was made of ice or diamond, but he came to realise it was actually a thick glass covering. Through the dusty surface, he could make out the body of a man, a space marine, firstborn. The beeping and the readouts on the monitor in front of him told Andar that the man and the large creature next to him were alive, though his sight told him a worse story. Almost half of the man's body was gone. His right eye, arm and leg were completely missing, the wound still bright pink and angry. It could not have happened long before he was interred in this machine to keep him alive. Next to him was a large furry shape, bigger even than a thunderwolf. Andar could make out teeth, claws, a snout, and stubby ears. This bear, Andar realised, was placed next to the man, also kept in some kind of stasis. He saw runes in bronze, like the ones on the door, written along the side of the massive casket. "What does it say?" asked Erlen. It's Fenrisian, said Andar. He had made sure to study the script and language of Fenris during his downtime. It says, Here lies Valbjorn, lord of the 10th Great Company, the wolf among eagles, he who howls with the stars. May Rus watch over his lost son and guide him to the All-Father's throne. There was silence in the hall. Andar looked up. Boren had made his way to where they stood and had placed a clawed hand on the side of the glass. They locked eyes. Boren growled. King. Thank you very much for listening to the prologue of the Star Hunters sagas. If you enjoyed it, please do like and leave a comment. For more videos, subscribe to the channel and share it around with your friends. This will show me that more videos would be appreciated. You can also follow me on social media at @the_star_hunt on both Instagram and Twitter. Until next time.